I can introduce Dr. Altaie from Yarmouk University in Jordan. Dr. Basel is an assistant professor of cosmology and physics at that university, and he's going to talk to us tonight, as you'll have seen from the programme, about an Islamic approach to natural philosophy. Before I hand it over to him, however, may I draw to your attention that on Wednesday the 2nd of February, the next of our meetings will be by Professor Ed Maltby.
1 hour time, and I hope that everybody will get an idea of what I'm talking about this evening. I lost the screen here. Theory of the cosmological argument is as significant or as universally ignored as that of the Arabic theologians and philosophers. Although we find in them the origin and development of two of the most important versions of the cosmological argument, namely the argument for temporality and the argument from contingency. The contributions of these Islamic thinkers is virtually ignored in Western anthologies and books on the subject. This was, in fact, part of William Craig. I am a cosmologist. I work in physics, cosmology, and relativity theory. So perhaps one would ask me, how did you get in touch with Kalam? Kalam is supposed to be a theology or a philosophy, creed. In fact, I came in touch with this subject when I started doing some works on the philosophy of physics. That goes to the 1988, 1989. There I published one paper in early 90s about the subject of Kalam. I found that Kalam is divided into two subjects. One is Daqiq al-Kalam and the other is Jalil al-Kalam. But before that, let us define who are the Mutakallimun. Al-Mutakallimun are a group of thinkers, Islamic thinkers and theologians who tried to verify, so to speak, the Islamic creed, the Islamic view of nature and God, and present it in a rational way. So they went first to discuss or study the physical nature itself, and then try to derive their concepts rationally to present their ideas about the heavens and God. They appeared during the 2nd century after Hijrah, that is the 8th century AD, and continued to be effective until the end of the 12th century AD. The ideas remain to be vital part until now of Islamic theology or Islamic creed. In Arabic, kalams means words, means speech, literally translated. But when you see what kalam means, it means a dialogue also. And this is the meaning intended to the Islamic kalam. Philosophically, al-Kalam is a collection of concepts, assumptions, principles, and the problems that try to explain the relation between God and the physical world in accordance with the Islamic creed. In fact, this goes to Daqiq al-Kalam when I say physical world. But if I remove the word physical, then it applies to all Kalam. Otherwise, if I put physical word, it goes to Daqiq al-Kalam. Classically, Kalam forms the foundation of jurisprudence or fiqh. Islamic fiqh is based actually on Kalam principles and Kalam arguments. That's why it's also important for the Islamic Sharia. Kalam forms usul al-fiqh, the foundation of fiqh. There are two divisions of Kalam. We have Jalil al-Kalam, literally the coarse Kalam, the coarse, the great Kalam, and Daqiq al-Kalam, the fine Kalam. Jalil al-Kalam deals with problems related to the divine attributes, resurrection of dead, the questions related to the divine knowledge, will and power, etc. So here comes the question of man's free will and the counter-proposal of self-acquisition of human action as proposed by one group of Mutakallimun. Whereas Daqiq al-Kalam deals with problems of natural philosophy, creation or the eternity of the universe, space, time, motion, and matter are subjects of Daqiq al-Kalam. Also, we have the question of causality, and this poses the subject of the validity of physical laws. In fact, I can confidently say that subjects of Daqiq al-Kalam are still virgin subjects. No much studies has been done till now, although we have two big references in English. Most important of them is the Harry Wilson, The Philosophy of the Kalam, a book of 800 pages. But there are much work to be done on this subject. With all respect to the works that has been done until now, I still feel that this subject is virgin. The reasons for the rise of Kalam was originally, in my opinion, this is my own, in fact, opinion, which I don't find many people disagreeing with me, that the first was internal. The different Islamic factions went different or adopted different approaches to the verifying the Islamic creed. Also, there is another subject which is most important now, and that is the second reason I put it. I call it the natural mutation or the back reaction of the Muslims to the new ideas and thoughts they faced when they become in contact with the new nations and civilizations they conquered during the early days of Islam. As you know, Islam spread within a very short time to the east through Persia, to India, etc., and China, and from the west they tried to conquer the Anadolu and maybe East Europe, and through Africa, north of Africa. Here they came across in new ideas, new philosophies, and they had to convince other nations that their message is correct, and they have the right approach to understand God and nature. This contact created a dialogue between civilizations rather than a clash of civilizations. It's quite unfortunate and disappointing that humanity now, at this age, 13 centuries after that great experience, comes to the state of no choice other than the clash of civilizations, according to the American strategist Samuel Huntington. We have two main schools of Kalam, the Mu'tazilites, al-Mu'tazila, and the Ash'arites, al-Ash'ariyya. The first one, the Mu'tazilites, are the oldest. Founders are Wasil ibn Ata, perhaps, who was in connection, who was in fact a colleague of Al-Hasan al-Basri, and then he had different opinions about the fate of the sinner, etc. And they claim that this was the point where both Al-Hasan al-Basri and Wasil ibn Ata diverted, or Wasil rather, diverted his studies and created the so-called Mu'tazilites. Comes also Amr ibn Ubayd and Abu al-Hudhayd al-Allaf. Ibrahim al-Nadham is a famous Mu'tazilite, and his student al-Jahab, the well-known Jahab. Later authors of Mu'tazilites and thinkers is al-Khayyat and al-Ka'bi and al-Jibai and his son Abu Ali al-Jibai and Abu Hashim al-Jibai. Some biographers and historians of Kalam later appeared, like Abu Rashid al-Naysaburi, Abd al-Jabbar al-Hamadani, and his student Ibn Matawi, who died in fact 450 after Hijrah. I just missed these 2 years. They in fact wrote good books, which is preserved now, about the ideas of Mu'tazilite. Then we have the other group, which is al-Ash'ariyya, Ash'arites. This was formed by Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, who defected from the Mu'tazilite. He was, in fact, a student of al-Jibai, and they had disagreements on some, also some on questions originally in Jalil al-Kalam, not in Daqiq al-Kalam. But later on there were al-Baqillani and the famous al-Ghazali, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, also had contributed original works to Abd al-Din al-Iji, who is considered the latest Ash'arite. Of course, we have many books already, actually in Arabic. Most of them are in Arabic. And the question is, what's so interesting? Why I do find Daqiq al-Kalam interesting? And why do I feel that we need to revisit Daqiq al-Kalam? To answer this question, in fact, one, we spot clearly that the subjects of modern physics, concepts, problems, have a common base with problems in Daqiq al-Kalam, as I will show later. In fact, although Daqiq al-Kalam is over 1,000 years old, but you can say that there are many concepts which echoes epistemologically, and I insist epistemologically at least, to some modern ideas and concepts. So we seek for any common understanding, if any, and some, in fact, resources of the original source of Kalam is different from, rather I would say the approach of Kalam is different from the approach of philosophers. If we look at Mutakallimun, we see that they start from the Quran, the divine revelations, and through reason they try to describe the world. So according to Mutakallimun, we should conceive the world, the physical world, according to the stipulations of the Quran, through the interpretation given to these stipulations or relation, through reason. Whereas, so we have God, reason, and the physical world. Whereas philosophers, and by philosophers I mean also those Islamic philosophers like al-Kindi, al-Farabi, Ibn Rushd, Ibn Tufail, Ibn Sina, al-Kindi, they all follow the same trend, the same approach of, obviously, of the Greek philosophy, where they start from nature, from the physical world, through the reason, through the mind, they try to formulate a picture of what God is all about. This is mainly the theme. Obviously, no way in 1 hour lecture I can provide you with a fully authenticated or substantiated account, but in my lecture I have in fact here 14 pages on this lecture, and I could make some references to the original writings of Kalam. In fact, we can spot or designate 5 main principles on which most Mutakallimun, Mu'tazilite and Ash'arite agree. This is the base for all Daqiq al-Kalam, these 5 principles. The first is the principle of creation. All Mutakallimun believe that the world was created out of nothing. Obviously, there are some who believe that it was created out of an existing or pre-existing form of matter. Correct. But they all agree that in this physical form, as we see it, the world is created, temporal and contingent. Recently, William Craig, in his book, The Kalam Cosmological Principle, he quotes original contributions of the Mutakallimun on this subject, and indeed, I found the man fair in in attributing original ideas to those Mutakallimun on the subject. The second principle is atomism. As is also well known in the history of Kalam, that Mutakallimun saw everything discrete, atomized, composed of non-divisible parts, that you can divide everything into millions and millions and millions of parts, but then you have to reach a rock bottom where a non-divisible object is reached. This applies to space and time. And this is the strange part of it, that it applies to time. In physics, these days, we are looking for a theoretical mechanism first to atomize time. Because if we can atomize time, if time is made atomic, at least in theory, then a whole new era of technology will be open to mankind, by which all the technology, existing technology now, will be something of the old ages. All these computers, all the communication systems will be so backward that everybody will feel that it is something very old. If we can achieve, and I'm talking now as a physicist, if we achieve a way to atomize time, obviously Mutakallimun did not tell us how they imagine time to be atomized, but they assume the concept. They assume the concept. Obviously, in this respect, they talked about substances and accidents, and they had the word or the concept al-Jawhar al-Fard. Al-Jawhar al-Fard is the non-divisible smallest part of anything, including the time, and they call it, for the time especially, they call it ana, A-N-A-A. It means a very, very small, short time. In physics now we talk about the 10 to the power minus 44 second, and we call it the blank time. Perhaps the ana can be realized as a one blank time. Accidents are the qualities and attributes associated with the substances. In fact, substances are abstract entities. The atomic, the Islamic atom, as Harry Wolfson put it, and also Shlomo Pines, is an abstract atom because it is magnitudeless and has no physical feature without having the accident associated with it. Well, the Quran stipulates that God is live and permanent. This was put only to substantiate that Mutakallimun, in every principle they devised, they had a reference to the Quran. Correct? It's a fact that when they discussed their principles with the others, non-Muslims, they didn't substantiate it by the Quran, because simply non-Muslim would say, well, this is your Quran, not mine. But they had the Quran as a background in their philosophy, when you look at their writings, like Ibn Hazm in his book Al-Fisal, Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, he substantiates his work with stipulations or ayat of the Quran. So the idea is simple. God is live and permanent actor. Substances are permanent, but accidents are temporal. That's why they have the accident changing all the time. Of course, they call accident al-Arab, and here I should point to one important point for anyone who wants to study such problems, and that is, we have here a difference between the Arabic concept and the translation. I mean, even as a concept, when we look at, for example, book of Harry Wilson, he talks about the Greek analog. He doesn't say the analog. He talks about the Greek origin of a concept, like, for example, like ada. Ada is custom. If it is literally translated, it is custom. And obviously, Aristotle talked about this concept. But ada, according to Mutakallimun, is different from custom according to Aristotle. Same happens with the substance and accident. A substance is not necessarily is the jawahir or al-jawhar al-fard. Not necessarily. Accidents are not necessarily al-a'rab. Arab or a'rab is different from accident or accidents in concept, in the used concept, in the so-called dynamical concept. We have a difference. And here we need to dwell, we need to dig the subject again and see whether it was fair to compare such. In the Quran, God is a sustainer of the world. So therefore, Muslim believes that he recreates, or Mutakallimun, recreates the world every moment. So we have a continuous recreation. You see this brown car? Mutakallimun says this brown bag, it only looks brown continuously because the color, this brownish color, is always recreated billions times each second. Billions of times each second. That's why you see it continuously. In fact, this is just put to substantiate or to give reason for the existence of God as a sustainer of the universe. Or it originates rather from the idea that God is the sustainer of the universe. Then we have the third principle, which is indeterminism. Mutakallimin thought of nature or natural laws or physical observations, to be more accurate, as being indeterministic. That's to say, there is some uncertainty always about the validity of natural laws. Natural laws, according to Mutakallimun, are not determined to happen. Events are not always determined to happen. God can change the law any moment. And this is a basic difference between Mutakallimun and philosopher. This brings the question again of causality. The question of causality, by the way, I found was also, or needs to be revisited because everybody says that Mutakallimun denied causality. In fact, they denied, I find, natural or deterministic rather, causality, but not the cause and effect relationship or sequence. They didn't deny the cause-effect relationship. They denied that cause or effect happens in a determined way. This is what I found with the original writings. Then we have the fifth principle, which I call the principle of relativity. Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri says bluntly that there is no absolute space and no absolute time. Moreover, the space and time are, you can say, both complementary concepts or interconnected concepts in Arabic, because you cannot find time without space, and you cannot find space without time. This comes in Arabic term, as a lingual or linguistic origin. Comes from the fact that time is only a measure of the motion, and a motion needs a body to be effective and needs a space to be space and a body. A body and a space in Arabic is interconnected. That is to say, there is no empty space. Absolutely empty space is nonsense in Arabic. Space exists only when a body exists. And this makes the connection with the time. No space without occupying body. The smallest bit of time is called ana. So we have no meaning to space or time before the creation of the world. This is a good reason to say how or what God was doing before creating the universe. This seems a legitimate question if there were time before the creation of the universe, if there is space before the creation of the universe. But once you connect space and time to the existence of matter, and you deny any existence for space and time before that, then you are clear at the point by saying that this question is meaningless. It is indeed meaningless, the question what God was doing before creating the universe, because there is no before for the creation of the universe. There is no before. There's only after. Motion. Here we come to an interesting, very interesting physical interpretation of motion. Mutakallimun thought or said that a body is faster, or seen faster than another, because there are less stationary points on its trajectory. Now in physics we say a body is faster than another only because it covers more distance within the same bit of time or period of time. So we divide the distance by the time duration and we get the average velocity. If you would like to talk about instantaneous velocity, you take the derivative, dx by dt. This is instantaneous, but Mutakallimun have different concept. They believe that the trajectory of a body is subdivided into basic elements, small space-time points, and these points, in between every point and another, there is a stationary point, a gap, if you like. And this what led al-Nadham to talk about the concept of tafra, the jump. Incidentally, Max Jemer, the German physicist, writes in his book, The Philosophy of Quantum Physics, that al-Nadham can be considered the first quantum physicist. And I have a quotation in the footnotes, a quotation from Max Jemer. In fact, it was really surprising. If I would have said myself the same thing, some people would say that you are biased to the al-Nadham, being Muslim or Arabic. But having found that Max Jemer is talking about it was indeed a pleasant and a happy occasion for me to substantiate what I was saying. Yes, I have this in the book of Yemen. It's true that different schools of Kalam present. By the way, perhaps I am, one would say, well, true, but perhaps you are oversimplifying the problems. As we know, there were different factions of Mutakallimun, different schools. And within the same school, say, Mu'tazili or Ash'ari, they have different factions also. So how could you say that Daqiq al-Kalam forms a whole natural philosophy, Islamic philosophy? I do not claim, in fact, that, or I cannot claim that Daqiq al-Kalam form one whole philosophy of nature. What I claim is that there are some basic trends in Kalam, Daqiq al-Kalam, which may contribute originally to the natural philosophy of present day through the principles, the 5 principles I was talking about. By the way, if this lecture was delivered, say, 100 years ago, 1905, many people would say, Dr. Altaie, you are talking nonsense. Correct? It is. These principles are found in the Kalam books, but unfortunately, nature is not discrete, it's continuous, time is continuous, the universe is eternal, it's not created, laws of physics are deterministic, space and time are separate, and we have absolute space and absolute time. But after 1905, I can say after 1911, after Niels Bohr discovered the quantization of an atom, and after Einstein put his theory of relativity, and after Werner Heisenberg discovering the uncertainty principle, and after Erwin Schrödinger or Max Born discovering the indeterminism of or the probabilistic nature of physical laws or measurements, we can confidently say that there is something true in Daqiq al-Kalam. Without that, obviously, Daqiq al-Kalam would have been nonsense. In no way I claim that the philosophy of the Kalam forms an integrated body that can be found within one individual Mutakallim. No one Mutakallim would describe Daqiq al-Kalam properly, nor that it forms a complete modern philosophy of nature. But some thoughts of Mutakallimun, namely Daqiq al-Kalam, echoes with some contemporary concepts and principles of modern physics. In fact, in the written version I have written epistemologically, just to be accurate, not to mix between the modern physical concepts and the epistemological content of it. Because obviously no Mutakallim would represent a modern physicist. This might serve as a possible candidate for a kind of philosophical feedback to the theory of nature. By this I mean, I always bring the example of atomizing time, and atomizing rather space and time. I bring this example to show that a consistent theory of Kalam, which was based on atomism, may serve or lead the way to some kind of atomization of space and time, especially if we consider their concept of motion, which is genuinely different from our concept of motion. By the way, the Kalam concept of motion solves the Zeno paradox. It solves the Zeno paradox through the idea of tafra, madam tafra. There are few problems that can be worked out by any interested person, by the way. I find not much work being done, while I find much resources, much writings about these problems in Arabic literature or in Kalam literature. Not much translated into English, unfortunately. But perhaps we can start a whole trend of studies of some original works within which some really original works can be done. These problems are the most prominent in front of me now, but there may be many. The first one, as I said, is the discreteness of time. I think I talked much about it. We don't need to dwell on that again. Then there is the question of causality. This is another problem which can lend itself to serious studies. Also, the diversity of the concepts involved has caused widespread confusion. I believe that, or I claim that there is the whole subject is confused. Some historians of philosophy have misconception about this problem. They claim that Mutakallimun have denied causality, which is not true in my opinion. But the flat rule is that God has absolute free rule, flat rule in causality, that has the absolute free will, and He is the sustainer of the universe. He created. Nature cannot act consistently on its own. You see, here, Now, if you ask any quantum physicist, and you ask him, if physical laws are not deterministic, what does that mean? It means, in fact, that one has to assume some kind of another supernatural force, as Paul Davies called it. A supernatural force is playing all the game. A prominent physicist like Paul Davies, who was in fact, when I was a PhD student at Manchester University, he was just beginning his life. That was in the mid-70s with his students. In fact, I consider myself as one of his students. I found Paul Davies, who was for some time, he was completely atheist, especially during the 70s at least, and his book, Space and Time in the Modern World, substantiated this fact. Once in a discussion, he was blaming religious peoples for preventing mind from proper thinking. And I said, well, sometimes you find in religion some thoughts which provoke you to think properly, rather than prevent you from thinking properly. But it depends how you interpret the verses of the Old Testament or the New Testament or the Quran. It depends on your interpretation. The third problem, well, this is subject of causality. I think I have given it enough time. The third problem is the eternity of the universe. As every cosmologist now agree, all cosmologists agree, that the universe was created some time ago. In fact, they estimate 10 to the power, or let's say 15 billion years ago, between 10 and 20 billion years ago. And this concept was already, in fact, suggested by Kalam. The most interesting point is the discussions of Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali discussed the question by, in fact, saying that the universe, by asking the question, can the universe be larger or smaller than its present state? This question was asked by Ghazali centuries ago. And in his book, the very famous book, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, he reaches the result after lengthy discussion. He concludes by saying that, yes, the universe can be larger, can be smaller, because God has the absolute free will. Moreover, Al-Ghazali says or asks the philosophers a question: what do we have beyond the universe? Do we have matter or vacuum? If they say matter, if the philosopher would answer by saying, yes, we have matter beyond the universe, then Ghazali says, why not being part of the universe? And if they say vacuum, then this contradicts the Aristotle principle that vacuum do not exist. So he answers by saying, there is none, because the universe itself exists wherever matter exists. And again, the question of what is beyond the universe is very similar to the question, or rather originates from the same point, the question whether what God was doing before creating the universe. So he says it is a meaningless question. Thank you for listening to me, and I thank the Institute, by the way, for giving me this chance to talk to you and explain these ideas. Your questions will be welcomed within the next, say, 25 minutes or so. Thank you.
Or aspect of temporality, or understanding of temporality between Eastern and Western modern philosophy, what would it be?
You rather would say between philosophers and Mutakallimun.
Okay.
Or do you insist on Western?
No,
Eastern?
that's fine, but I thought there would be a difference between our understanding in the East of temporality through our philosophers than the modern philosophy in the West.
Well, yeah, I see your point. The modern philosophy nowadays in the West is deeply rooted to in one way or another, to the Greek philosophy. I mean, European culture, European thoughts are deeply rooted in the Greek philosophy. So temporality would stand somehow as an obstacle to the development of physics. You may find these words strange, but I tell you that two cosmologists wrote recently a book, Collins and Lachine, a book, Cosmology, by John Wilder and Son. In the introduction, they say that believing in an ordered universe, ordered and eternal universe, delayed the discovery, I mean in the West, delayed the discovery of an expanding universe for about half a century. This is in their book Cosmology by Lachine and Collins. I have the full reference for the book. So, in my opinion, the very same frame, if you like, having the Western thought being deeply rooted to eternity, with the Greek eternity, it's somehow preventing from developing a discrete time, and therefore a clear realization of temporality. That's my opinion.
Thank you very much for a very thought-provoking set of ideas. Now I speak as a non-scientist, but it seems to me that the mere fact that we're not capable of visualizing or expressing the causality that might obtain in the universe doesn't mean to say it's not there. So it seems like there seem to be two escape routes from my skeptical point of view. One is a sort of religious one that all the sort of Tawheed people have, which says this is wonderful. The causality principle doesn't exist, and this opens the way for the free will of a creator. And then there's another atheistic sort of cop-out that says that the universe is based on something tantamount to gambling, which some deep inner instincts suspect is quite wrong. But I don't want to lose my optimism that it is possible to get to grips with the actual causality of the universe. The mere fact, like the weather, yeah, we can't predict it on gambling principles, probability principles. But in time, it must be at least possible to accumulate all the mini causalities that actually make the weather on a given day, for example.
Correct. This is my comment by saying that what I fully agree with what you have said. But unfortunately, we have no means to discover these so-called hidden variables. Hidden variables in physics, when quantum theory appeared and the concept of probabilistic laws of physics appeared, David Bohm, the German physicist, devised a theory called hidden variables theory, by which he tries to
are projected as being very much presenting opposed views
yes.
of the philosophers, and indeed Ibn Rushd was killed for his views. And I wondered if you could say, indicate how these apparently
Ibn Rushd was a faithful student of Aristotle and the Greek philosopher. He was a faithful student of Aristotle. Al-Ghazali was faithful Mutakallimun in his book, specifically in the book of Coherence of. Both do reflect, yes, I agree with you, do reflect the Islamic or Islamic views, though different, though conflicting, though apparently opponent of each other, but both reflect some kind of interpretation of the Quran. The Quran can be interpreted differently, as you well know, and accordingly will have different opinions. What I admire is the frame of reference